we'll give it just another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we might be at critical mass. Thank you all so much for being here. It's great to see so much interest in this program. My name is Grace Poots. I am an agriculture program specialist that working in the Division of Ag Development and working to administer the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant Program. I'll turn it over to my teammate Chad to introduce himself.
Hello, my name's Chad Kaufman there. I'm the RFSI grant specialist. I primarily work with reimbursements, contracts, and all of the little administrative things that go into a grant program.
So what we're going to do, just kind of go through an overview of the currently open request for proposals for this grant program with time for questions at the end. Please don't worry if your question doesn't get answered in this session. It will get answered. Chad's going to pop our email address into the chat. Feel free to send any remaining questions into that email inbox, and Chad and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program is a $420 million federal program to the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. It was originally announced in May of 2023 and is funded through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So one of those big COVID relief bills. This funding was allocated to each US state and territory, with Wisconsin receiving $27 million, making ours the second largest program in the country. In the first round of funding, 71 recipients were awarded infrastructure and equipment only grants. And those folks are hard at work implementing their projects across the state and tribal nations right now. So round two, which is what we're in now, is not new funding, but it's been designed to award the remaining funds allocated to Wisconsin in 2023. The goals of the RFSI program include improving food and agricultural supply chain resiliency, expanding middle of the food supply chain capacity for locally and regionally produced foods, offering more and better market opportunities to small to mid-sized agricultural producers in the state of Wisconsin, and increasing access to value-added opportunities and processing infrastructure. So this program is designed to build system-level resilience, not necessarily to benefit the individual farmer, business, or organization, and successful proposals will be those that aim to best address these goals. And when we talk about resilience, what does that mean exactly? There's a brief passage from the program scope and requirements that the USDA put out when they announced this program that I'll read. The pandemic and recent supply chain disruptions have revealed the perils of a national food system that depends on capacity concentrated in a few geographic areas and requires many steps to get from farm to fork. To be more resilient, the food system of the future needs to be more diversified, distributed, and local. So when we talk about increasing resiliency, we're talking about greater diversification, distribution, and more localization of our food system. We want more food that's being produced in Wisconsin to be aggregated, sold, distributed, and consumed in Wisconsin. So the details of the grant program. Awards will range from between $10,000 up to $99,999. They can include multiple pieces of equipment. Though this is really important, all equipment must be purchased by December 31st of this year. We're operating on a short timeline provided to us by the USDA to expend the remaining funds. And so all equipment purchases must be made by that date. Equipment can be new or used, but must fall into an eligible expense category. And those are food processing equipment, cold storage equipment, forklifts and skid steers, and special purpose delivery vehicles. Equipment must be used for middle of the supply chain activities. They must expand the capacity of the food supply chain in Wisconsin, which includes aggregating, processing, manufacturing, storing, packaging, transporting, wholesaling, and distributing locally and regionally produced eligible food products. So what are those eligible food products? They are those for human consumption, and they include specialty crops like fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, herbs, dairy, eggs, grains, aquaculture, honey, maple syrup, and others. Importantly, the products ineligible for funding are meat, poultry, wild-caught seafood, animal feed and forage products, fiber, landscaping products, tobacco, and dietary supplements. And the reason for meat and poultry being excluded in this grant program is that at the same time that the RFSI program came out, there was a meat and poultry supply chain resiliency grant that covered or funded similar activities for those products. It's also important to note that equipment items that require ground disturbance or infrastructure construction or renovation for their installation or pre-installation will not be considered. So for example, that would be requesting a cold storage unit that requires a concrete pad to be poured at your site prior to the installation of the cold storage unit. And the reason for that is that federally funded grant awards must undergo an environmental review process. It's because of a federal law called the National Environmental Policy Act, and there's just not enough time to complete the review required for ground disturbing activities prior to the funding deadline. And finally, subrecipients will have to pay for project costs themselves and then seek reimbursement from DACCAP. That's a standard process for DACCAP grant programs. So this is a reimbursement-based grant. Eligible applicants are agricultural producers and processors, for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, local government entities, tribal government entities, and institutions such as schools, hospitals, etc. Entities must be engaged in middle of the food supply chain activities such as processing, aggregation, or distribution of targeted agricultural products. All applicant businesses and organizations must be domestically owned with applicant facilities in the state of Wisconsin, within the state of Wisconsin. And I just saw a note come in, or a question come in from the chat. What do you mean by subrecipients? Great question. That is a little bit confusing. For the purposes of this grant program, the states and territories are considered by the USDA as the recipients of the funding. So DACCAP or the state of Wisconsin is the primary recipient, and then anyone who we are awarding funds to purchase equipment are considered the subrecipients. Good question. And then finally, for-profit entities. So this includes middle of the supply chain businesses and also agricultural producers and processors. Any for-profit applicant must meet the small business eligibility requirement of the relevant Small Business Administration size standard. So that would be using the North American Industry Classification System code that's assigned to your industry. It's a NAICS code. There's a lot more information about that in the RFP, but it's important that if you are a for-profit, you qualify as a small business under the Small Business Administration standards to be eligible to apply. And finally, entities are only eligible for one award. So now we're going to walk through the application materials that are required for a complete application to the program. The bolded items are ones that we'll cover in a little bit more depth in upcoming slides. But the applications will include the RFSI equipment only grant proposal form. This is a standard form provided to us by the USDA. We'll go over that in just a moment. A quote or estimate to substantiate the cost of any piece of equipment that you're requesting, a critical resources and infrastructure letter, a risk assessment survey, an environmental questionnaire, and then optionally up to 3 letters of support. So this is what the equipment only grant proposal form looks like when you open it up. It is the primary application form to be scored by our external review committee. This is what's going to take the greatest amount of time in your proposal. And it's a little bit finicky of a form. It's not a standard PDF. It's a fillable form. And so it must be downloaded from our webpage to be opened on your computer as opposed to in the browser. That won't work. And you'll need to have the most updated version of Adobe Reader to be able to open this document. There is a link on our website right next to the link to the proposal form where you can go to download Adobe Reader for free if that's not something that your computer currently has. If you have any issues or questions, feel free to contact us, but there's not a ton that we can do in terms of tech support, unfortunately. Additionally, probably my biggest piece of advice for completing this form is to follow along with the proposal guidance that's provided in the request for proposals. And so this is just a snapshot of what that proposal guidance looks like in the request for proposals. But it walks you through step by step what we're looking for, or what the reviewers will be looking for as a response to each of the items that you need to complete before submitting this form. Additionally, we have the critical resources and infrastructure letter, another requirement of the USDA. And there's a Word document template on our website. This will be in the form of a brief letter to the reviewers. It's not super important who it's addressed to. I think the template is to whom it may concern. And the purpose of this letter is to verify that you have all the necessary resources and infrastructure in place to install and use the requested equipment. So for example, this letter could be used to discuss the warehouse space that you rent and that you already have a lease for. And this is where my processing equipment will be stored. You could discuss existing equipment in a processing line that you already have that will work in tandem with the new equipment that you're requesting. Perhaps the garage or driveway tie-in that you have where the delivery vehicle that you're requesting will pick up and drop off the food products that you're discussing in your proposal. Things like that. This is a great place to discuss the fact that you already have a concrete pad poured outside of your pack shed where the cold storage that you're requesting will be placed. This letter will be reviewed by the reviewers and is really important for them to understand kind of what infrastructure already exists to demonstrate that you are permitted, able, and ready to install and use your requested equipment. Additionally, there's a risk assessment survey. This should not take you more than 10 minutes to complete. It will not be scored, although if you are awarded, you will be asked to attest to the accuracy of your responses. So this is a requirement of grant awards through DACAP. It just asks you some basic questions about your business or organization. And like I said, should be pretty straightforward. Then we have the environmental questionnaire. Please complete this to the best of your ability. It's a requirement of USDA grant programs related to that National Environmental Policy Act that I mentioned earlier. If awarded, you may be asked for additional information, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Let us know if you have any questions with this form. And then other than those 4 items I specifically went over, which are required, there's the quote or estimate from an equipment vendor that you plan to purchase the equipment from. A quote or estimate is required for each piece of equipment. And then letters of support, up to 3, you may submit, but that's optional. Okay, for the timeline, the application period is currently open. The deadline to apply is July 21st at 5 p.m. To submit your application materials, you'll send an email to the inbox that Chad sent in the chat earlier. That's also on our website and listed on the RFP. Late proposals will not be accepted, so I would plan to submit your application well before the deadline to ensure that you don't have any technical difficulties. If you plan to print and mail your application in, printed applications must be postmarked no later than July 14th, because we need to be able to receive, digitize, upload all of your application materials along with all of the digitally received applications to get ready to be reviewed by our external committee, which they will have until mid-August to review all applications received and provide us with their scores and written feedback. Then once the internal selection process has taken place, and that's essentially our team looking at the scores, deciding how many projects can be funded based on those scores. At that point, we will let you know that your application has moved on to the USDA review and approval stage. The USDA has 60 days to get back to us about the proposals that we send them from the date that we send them. So their review, feedback, and/or approval is anticipated in mid-October. With an anticipated mid-October review back from USDA, we anticipate contracts being signed at the end of October, which does not leave much time for equipment purchasing to be completed by December 31st of this year. All right, now we've entered the Q&A portion of the session. Please submit your questions in the chat. It looks like Chad has already gotten to a few of those, but I'll go through and answer them as they've come in. You can feel free to come off mute as needed when your question's being answered if there's anything more that you want to clarify or ask. And like I said at the beginning, if your question doesn't get answered before noon today in this session, don't worry. Chad and I are very prompt about getting answers to you as soon as we can. So please feel free to direct any remaining questions to this email inbox. Give me just a moment to scroll to the beginning of the chat. Will the equipment to process a food ingredient like sweet eligible? The answer to that would be potentially eligible. It's important that the food products being processed are Wisconsin agricultural products. So that would kind of be the key factor in determining whether this project would be a good fit for the program. What are subrecipients? I believe I answered your question, Jennifer, but please feel free to come off mute. It looks like you also asked if you were to get the equipment grant, would you be able to apply for infrastructure in the future? This is a one-time grant program. Like I said at the beginning, Wisconsin was awarded X amount of dollars. We awarded all of that funding to our first round of grant recipients. And this second round is designed to reallocate all of the funds that have been relinquished back to DACCAP for one reason or another from those subrecipients. So we have funding to fund an estimated between 8 and 15 equipment-only projects. The infrastructure grant program is unfortunately no longer. It's not coming back as far as we know, unless the USDA decides to put out another grant program in the future. But as far as we know at this time, this will be the last round until further notice. Jim asked, when you say purchased by 12/31/25. Jim, do you want to clarify or ask a question? When I say purchased by 12/31/25, I mean purchased by 12/31/25. Reimbursement requests need to be submitted by that date. Actually, I'm not even sure if that's true. We need to see that the funds have been expended by your organization to purchase that piece of equipment prior to the end of this year. You may receive reimbursement into the beginning of next year. So it's not that the process has to be fully wrapped up by the end of this year, but the equipment needs to be ordered by the end of this year. And that's a directive coming from the USDA. Chad, it looks like you came off mute. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, if you ever have any doubts there in terms of the timeline for if we are going to make that at end date there on your particular situation, because I mentioned there's a couple scenarios like we've been working with about 41 equipment only projects there that are handling. We're working with them on similar deadlines. So if, for example, there you have down payments, payment installments, or payment on receipt of the item there, or any particular situation with your entity, feel free to reach out to the RFSI inbox outlining the specific context of your guys' situation and let us know, and then we can provide you a thorough response there about what to do going forward.
And Jim, scrolling down in the chat, it looks like you sent a second message asking if an executed purchase order will work. Yes, there shouldn't be a problem with that. Like Chad said, it's best just to email with your particular situation or thoughts, and we can get back to you with a better answer. But at this time, we have not been told by the USDA that the equipment needs to be delivered or installed by 12/31. It needs to be purchased. The funds need to be expended. Okay, it looks like there was a question about how much is remaining in funds. Like I said, we anticipate being able to fund an additional 8 to 15 equipment only awards. That will depend on how much is being requested by the top scorers. Because like I said earlier, awards can range from between $10,000 and $99,999. Okay, good question, Christine. Is constructing a room within a current building for a new piece of equipment considered ground disturbance? It may or may not be considered ground disturbance, but the construction or renovation of an existing building would trigger the environmental review to ultimately determine whether or not it's considered ground disturbance. So any equipment that requires construction or renovation prior to its delivery and installation and use, unfortunately cannot be considered in this round. What equipment is considered acceptable for the grant? Anything that allocates with processing and kitchen equipment. Danny, did you want to come off mute and ask specifically what kind of equipment you're considering?
Like, yes, good morning. Yes, my question was as far as like a hood, like a commercial hood, anything that you would need in a commercial kitchen. So I'm referring to a ventless hood, which is
Yep.
not a traditional hood.
Yep, great question. Yes, that would be considered. Equipment for a commercial kitchen is eligible as long as, like I said, it doesn't require anything, significant construction prior to its installation.
Okay. And the other question I had added was for would it also cover professional installation expenses?
Another good question. I'm going to scroll down to that particular section in the RFP to just read to you exactly what it says there. It's under the eligible expenses portion of the RFP. It says the cost of shipping, equipment accessories, and/or simple installation provided by the equipment vendor may be included in the cost of purchasing a piece of equipment, so long as the cost is included in a corresponding quote.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you qualify for equipment that has already been purchased and installed in 2025? No. The equipment cannot already have been purchased. It needs to be something that you are planning to purchase and able to purchase before December 31st. Chad, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I'm sorry, I was reading a question there. Could you repeat that, Grace?
Yeah, the question is, can you qualify for equipment that has already been purchased and installed in 2025?
Nope.
Okay. And then going off of that, Corey, to reiterate the answer to your question, retroactive project costs will not be considered. Do you need to be licensed to qualify, or can a hobbyist qualify? Good question, Nathan. There are no qualification standards or requirements of the program. As long as you fall into one of the eligible applicant categories, you would be eligible to apply. Additionally, and I don't have a slide for this, but obtaining a unique entity identifier through sam.gov, it's a federally run website and system, is required for the application. You can see on that, excuse me, you can see on the application form that a UEI is listed as one of the items that you need in the applicant information section, and there may be restrictions in terms of what you need to get to obtain a UEI, in terms of, I believe, having an EIN, like a taxpayer EIN. Essentially, you have to be a business or an organization that would be recognized by that system in order to apply. Bill asked, would the replacement of existing refrigeration or freezers be considered? Yes, if you're applying for a new cold storage unit, whether that's a refrigerator, a freezer, you can absolutely, if you have an old one that is on its last legs, you can purchase a new one to replace it. However, you cannot request funding to fix or remodel any existing piece of equipment. Jennifer says, when I was filling out the proposal form, I was only able to add one piece of equipment. It didn't allow me to add additional rows. That's interesting. Give me one moment, Jennifer. And I will share my screen.
I was gonna say, I was just looking into that one too.
Can you see my screen, Chad?
Yep.
Okay. So this plus box right here, you can click on that and it will add additional lines for you. Similarly, you can select the minus button and that will remove lines that you don't need. And same goes for this product type table. You can add product rows and remove product rows as needed.
When I tried to do that, it wouldn't allow me to add more. What browser were you using?
So you cannot open this file in a browser. It needs to be downloaded to your computer and opened in Adobe Reader.
Okay.
If you kind of play around with that a little bit, Jennifer, and it's still not working for you, feel free to reach out and we'll come up with a solution.
Thank you.
Please define specialized vehicle. So a special purpose delivery vehicle would be the best example of this is a refrigerated delivery vehicle. That can either be a straight truck, it can be a retrofitted Sprinter van, a vehicle that is clearly designed and going to be used for the delivery of food products, as opposed to a pickup truck. Can you pay for the equipment by December 31st and have it delivered in 2026? Yes, as long as it's purchased and ordered by December 31st, it can be delivered into 2026. Would the processing of mint oil be eligible? I don't believe so. If it's an additive being used in toothpaste or gum, yeah, that would not be eligible, as it's not a product for human consumption. We do consume toothpaste and gum, but it's not a food product. Maurice, would you like to go off mute?
Yes. My question is, do we have to pay for the item first and then we get reimbursement, or can we submit a request to purchase and then receive the check to pay for it before the end of December 31st?
Great question. Great question. Unfortunately, there is no way for us to get the grant funds to you to use them to pay for the equipment that you're purchasing. We operate on a system of the grantee pays for the product or service, and this is just a general rule for the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, and then requests reimbursement from Chad using the invoice for that piece of equipment and the proof of payment to prove that funds left your account and went to the equipment vendor to purchase the equipment, at which point Chad would process the equipment and then you would receive the money shortly after that. Is there anything you wanted to add, Chad?
Nope. Yep. And another thing too is you'll have to submit it in a package there along with your request for reimbursement sheet. The details on the reimbursement request process for the RFSI program are on the RFSI webpage. If you'd like to take a look and scroll down on the reimbursement guide that outlines that procedure. Overall, we're able to get reimbursements out once they're fully approved by myself and finance within about a week or so, but we usually anticipate though for your entity about a month out, just in case there's any hiccups, or if you selected checks or versus direct deposit. So just to give you a bit of an idea there of the reimbursement process.
Okay, so would we be able to get shelving for our center, our distribution center?
Shelving is not included in the in any of the eligible expense categories, unfortunately. It's going to have to be cold storage, refrigeration or freezer, specialized delivery vehicle, kitchen processing equipment, or forklift and skid steer.
Okay. All right.
Items.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. And going off Maurice's question, this is the RFSI webpage on the Department of Ag's website. This is where all the information and materials to apply are located. This tab is a set of resources being used by our currently awarded subrecipients, but there is a document here, the pre-disbursement financing resources. And this, you can take a look at this. It's a set of Wisconsin Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs, or other institutions that may provide capital and bridge loan financing for grant-funded purchases. So if the cash flow is a barrier in applying or receiving this award, applying for or receiving this award, feel free to take a look at this document or reach out to us with any concerns, and we'll do our best to help facilitate the financing prior to receiving the disbursement of funds. What are the criteria for an eligible quote or estimate? Would printed item online be okay? If not, what is needed exactly? That's a great question, Laura. It can be an invoice from an equipment vendor, or a quote or estimate directly from an equipment vendor. It can also be a screenshot of a website from which you plan to purchase the requested piece of equipment. It kind of is pretty dependent on what the piece of equipment is. If you have any questions about whether or not your quote or estimate would be acceptable, feel free to reach out to us and we can let you know. On a case specific basis. Remodeling shop to create a kitchen. Craig, did you want to elaborate? Corey asks, so costs cannot be incurred or paid at all in order to remain eligible for the program. Would that then mean that costs cannot be paid until after October? Great question. Chad, do you want to hop in?
Sure. Yes. We would need a fully executed contract between your entity and ours there to consider those pieces eligible. So it would have to fall within that narrow time frame. Again, USDA provided an estimate that it would take 60 days for them to send us back their fully approved applications there once we submit to them. So our estimate there at the latest there is October 31st there to receive full approval there on your entity's applications, but it could be shorter. We're also in communications with them, finding some more criteria there, but if there's any changes from what I previously just mentioned there, we'll provide an update. But for the most part, yes, it needs to be within that time frame there from when your contract is fully executed, meaning that all signatures are placed on the document there between your entity and DATCAP, and that December 31st end date.
And I just want to say that this was not our plan for running a second round of this grant program. We anticipated having until mid-2027 to expend these funds. And then we learned in May from the USDA that there was a directive from their leadership that these funds need to be expended by December 31st of this year. And so we're working as hard as we can to put together a viable program to be able to get this money into Wisconsin's food supply chain, but we completely understand that it's not the most convenient timeline to be operating on, especially when equipment is not the easiest thing to find and purchase in a reasonable amount of time. And so we fully understand that and are will work with you to the best of our ability to make it work, but we just have a pretty constrained ability ourselves in what we're able to do or change based on what we've been given from the federal level. In the grant form, in both the equipment list and type of agricultural product list, there is a number column. What belongs here? Great question. That is answered in the RFP in the proposal guidance section, but that will just be a numerical list. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not like 7 cabbages or 3 delivery vans. It's just a list from 1 to however many items are in your list. If the minimum is 10,000 and the equipment need is less than that, I am assuming that we can ask for more than one piece of equipment to meet that number. That's correct, Rebecca. Would supplies for food processing like containers and labels be eligible? Unfortunately, no, supplies are not eligible. This is an equipment-only grant, aptly named. Sorry if I missed this. Are funds distributed before purchase, or are you required to pay upfront and are reimbursed after purchase? Funds are not distributed upfront. You're required to pay for the piece of equipment, and then as soon as you can prove, like you have proof that the funds have left your account, you can send that reimbursement request to us, and we'll begin processing that to get you paid, to get you reimbursed for the piece of equipment that you have a contract with us saying that you've been awarded. Equipment for dairy processing in a state certified portable trailer, is that eligible? I would certainly think so, but I'd probably need a bit more information, Mitchell, about your specific case, and that might be best suited to an email exchange. So feel free to ask more specifically about your situation via email. What is the timeline for buying the equipment? Would you have to purchase the equipment after the grant is awarded? Yes. Is there an income limit for eligibility? No, although the SBA size standard that you'll have to meet if you are a for-profit entity, in some cases, the size standard for an industry is based on gross profit, I believe, and in some cases, it's based on the number of employees that the main applicant entity employs. So there's no income limit for eligibility specifically, though you have to meet the SBA size standard that's relevant to your industry classification system code, your NAICS code. And if you are an entity that files taxes, you have this code. How long is the estimated time to get the reimbursement? Is the grant all or nothing? As in if asking for 3 pieces of equipment, you would get funding for all or just some? I'm going to let Chad first answer the estimated time to get reimbursement question.
If everything is approved and all the necessary materials there are there on your reimbursement request there and correlate 1-to-1 there with what the amount you're requesting, and there's no issues with its compliance there with your particular application, reimbursement requests for equipment only move very quickly here. And it also depends too on when, I don't know if you are already have a supplier information within the state system there. It might, if you do, or any entity that currently is not within the state system there, they would select either the direct deposit or a check. Checks usually take about 3 to 4 weeks, depending on when those checks are printed out and their approval internally. Direct deposits take about a week or so once they've fully been approved within our internal system.
And then the second question is the grant all or nothing? As in, if asking for 3 pieces of equipment, would you get funding for all or just some? We will fund as many whole or full awards as possible, but to be able to distribute as many funds as possible, it is not out of the question that we may come to you and say, you scored kind of on the cusp of what we're funding and what we can't fund. You'll be receiving this amount of money. Choose the equipment that you've listed on your application as your priority.
And
Chad?
also, oh, sorry, I was just going to say too, and add, like, it all has to, all those equipment pieces there have to make sense there within the scope of your project too, as well. So they all have to contribute towards its overall success. So if, for example, there, the equipment pieces there are kind of more like a house of cards where one is removed there and the entire project is not viable, then that might be the case. So it really depends on the context more so. But we try to fund everybody as much as we can if they are on the cusp or, or there's something viable there, as Grace mentioned.
Organic fertilizer production is not an eligible item for this grant program. It's not a human consumable. Eggs are eligible. Chickens being raised for meat are not eligible. Chickens being raised for eggs are eligible, although it's very important. It's a very important distinction to be made that the equipment is not for the chickens. It shouldn't be. It's for the eggs. It's for the washing, processing, packaging, distribution of those eggs. But eggs as a poultry product, they are eligible. Is the minimum grant of $10,000 for each piece of equipment, or can a grant include a number of smaller pieces of equipment that are over $10,000 in total? The minimum grant award will be $10,000, but it can include a number of smaller pieces of equipment that are over $10,000 in total. Where do we go to find out if we qualify as a small business under the SBA guidelines? That information is all in the request for proposals under the eligible applicant section. Would an HVAC system being installed in our dairy plant be eligible for the equipment grant? It would not. It does not fall into one of those 4 eligible expense categories. Budget narrative. Is there any examples available for applicants to show exemplary equipment justification? Christine, there are no examples per se, but I believe if you follow the evaluation rubric and the application guidance that was provided in the RFP, you should be on the right track to provide an exemplary justification. Are these funds applicable to equipment used in the manufacturing process, such as cooking or filtering, or are they exclusively for distribution activities like packaging and shipping? Manufacturing is certainly included. Value-added production is a large priority of this grant program, and one of the eligible equipment expense categories is processing equipment. Can you include a link to the application in the chat, please? I will include a link to the website where all of the application materials can be found.
Hope I just did that. Sorry.
Okay. Well,
no.
You have it twice.
There you go. Twice. There you
go. Just to be clear, with meat being an exemption, are value-added meat products also exempt? Yes. However, yes, and if you are requesting, for example, a cold storage unit or a delivery vehicle that is intended to either store or distribute meat and dairy items, for example, it is an eligible request to prorate the amount of that vehicle or storage unit that will be handling ineligible and eligible items based on the percent space or time that will be provided for eligible activities. So if you're requesting a delivery vehicle and you anticipate 15%, or that the delivery vehicle will be used 15% of the time to transport meat and the rest of the time to transport eggs, you may describe that in detail and request a prorated amount of that vehicle, so 85% of the total cost of that vehicle. Also, it's important to note that equipment items can be more than $99,999, but you can request up to $999, whatever. You can request up to that amount as to fund a portion of the piece of equipment that is eligible. In the application, are you seeing the application?
Yes.
Okay. There is a purchase price column in the budget section and a funds requested column. And so that's where you would make that distinction between how much the item costs, and that is connected to the quote or estimate that you're providing. and then the funds requested is the amount that you're hoping to be reimbursed for that item. So if you're requesting 2 pieces of processing equipment and together they're more than $99,999, you can request the full purchase price for the first piece of equipment, and for the second piece of equipment, you can request the remainder. I'm in the process of building a kitchen in my existing garage. Would I be eligible for any kitchen equipment? You'd have to be more specific in terms of what you're looking for us to make a determination on that, Craig. So I would recommend you send us an email, or you can come off mute now.
Oh, crap. Oh, Clay. Can't.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm in the process of building the kitchen, getting things approved. And I heard you say that if you don't have your structure built, that these items would not be eligible. So was I incorrect in that?
I don't believe so. You're asking about equipment going into a garage that already exists, correct? That's correct.
But we don't have the bathroom installed yet. We don't have the walls up for the kitchen, but the plan is being approved by the state right now. So I just wondering, do I have to get that thing moving in order to be eligible?
Got it. Okay. It's a great question, and it's not, I wish I had a simpler answer. The reason for this no construction or pre-installation work, like the reason around that stipulation is that we don't have time to go through an extensive environmental review in order to be able to approve your project and to have you purchase the equipment before December 31st. So if the piece of equipment can be delivered to you and it just needs an outlet to be plugged in when your building is ready to have it be plugged in, that's okay.
Okay.
If it's a large piece of equipment that's going to be the size of a room that you're going to need to add on to your pack shed in order to house, that's not allowed, because there's work that needs to be done in order to house, install, use that piece of equipment. If you're in the middle of a construction project and it doesn't really impact the installation of the equipment itself, there should be no issue there. What we're trying to avoid and what we need to avoid, unfortunately, so that we can get this done in time, is the pouring of a concrete pad for a cold storage unit, the addition of an additional room onto a building, extensive electricity work to an old building. Things like that would require an extensive review process that we just can't accommodate, unfortunately, for this round. I hope that answers your question.
We'd also need to put a sewer tank in, and so that is in the plan too. Would that be okay? Like, I just want to get like wall ovens, and maybe a range oven.
If the ovens are not related to the sewer system, then that's fine.
Okay.
If the other work that you're doing is not directly related to the equipment, that can be avoided. Like, we don't have to review that work that you're doing outside of this equipment for the purposes of this program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to mention too, it might be worthwhile though to mention this in terms of the evidence of critical resources and infrastructure letter, if you're going to be submitting an application there in terms of where these potential pieces of equipment might be housed.
Yeah, totally, Craig. That's a great point that Chad made. Making the distinction of we're in the process of building this processing facility or whatever it is that you're doing. Here's where we're at. Here's what needs to be done. The purchasing of my 6-range stove and oven doesn't require any construction or renovation prior to it being delivered and installed.
Okay.
Making that distinction clear for the reviewers is important.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. I've lost where we are at in the chat.
I think Matthew at 11:35 a.m.
Yep, thank you. Will there be partial approvals of equipment? Okay, we already answered that one. Jamal asks, is the criteria a bit different from the infrastructure portion of the grant? Meaning, does the proposal need to show support to more than one entity? It's not a requirement, but stronger proposals will demonstrate an ability or an impact, a greater impact on the system as a whole, as opposed to just on one particular business, producer, organization, entity. So it's not a requirement, but a stronger proposal will demonstrate greater ability to have an impact on system level resilience. If I have 4 things on the request, is it all or nothing? Okay, we already answered that one. State certified trailer is not purchased yet. Could the loan be used for that also? The equipment only grant. Would a shelter for a wash pack be eligible? Are you asking whether the shelter is able to house the equipment, or are you asking if the shelter can be purchased or constructed with the grant? Mary.
I guess I'm just looking for like right now we have like a temporary carport shelter, and I'm just looking for something that's a little bit more durable. It wouldn't need to be like laid on concrete or anything, but just looking for like I think a pole barn might be too strong of a word, like too strong of a structure even.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yeah. I don't think that you could make the case, unfortunately, that that structure would be included in any of the 4 eligible categories for this round.
Okay.
Will there be a preference for smaller grants? No, we're just going based on the scores, based on the strength of the applications received. Do you have to create a project per se, or can you just ask for equipment that you want to get something done to advance your business? You can certainly ask for equipment that you want to get something done to advance your business. But the grant program has a purpose and it has goals, and proposals will be scored based on their ability to meet those goals of the program. Would cold storage for bare root fruit trees be eligible? I grow these trees for sale. No, that would be considered a pre-harvest activity. The trees themselves are not an agricultural product for human consumption. That would not be eligible. Skid steer for grass-fed beef production. Beef is not an eligible item. A delivery truck costs $125,000. Can we cost share? Yes, absolutely. If you have a quote for a delivery vehicle for $125,000, put that in the purchase price column of the budget table, and then for the funds requested, go up to $99,999. Importantly, if you have another grant, 2 grants cannot be used to purchase the same piece of equipment. And so you can't cost share the price of a piece of equipment with another grant. And that is spelled out a little bit more clearly in the RFP. Okay, Maurice, do you want to jump in quick?
Yeah, when answering the questions, is it best to just be direct and to the point, or you want a whole lot of detail?
That's a great question. My strongest piece of advice would be to be clear and concise, but make sure that you're reading the evaluation rubric and the proposal guidance in the RFP and making sure that you're fully answering everything that is requested of the various sections in those parts of the RFP. This form was provided, the proposal form was provided to us by the USDA, and then we had to come up with a system to evaluate it. And so that system has been spelled out in the RFP. And so it may not be totally clear just from reading the application what exactly the information is that's being requested of you. But if you fill out the proposal in conjunction with the RFP instructions, it should be clear what information you should be including in each of those sections to fully answer the question. Does that answer your question right now?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. We are unfortunately out of time for any more questions, but please feel free to reach out to us in that email inbox and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Again, the application deadline is July 21st at 5 p.m. Thank you all so much for attending this session. We look forward to hopefully receiving applications from you, and don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks and have a great day. Good luck.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.